one of the most important things that we did was for every one of his combat actions, we sort of we came up with a single pose that sort of was emblematic of that action. And so, when he was in that very unique, recognizable pose, you knew what he was going to do.
Hey, what's up, PlayStation Blogcasters? This is Aaron Kaufman. I'm the Senior Community Manager at Santa Monica Studio, and we are taking over the PlayStation Blogcast with a new limited miniseries called Worlds Collide. In this limited podcast series, we're bringing together different departments across our studio that collaborated together on a feature to evolve God of War. Now, if you watched our full-length documentary, Raising Kratos, you got a glimpse into our journey reinventing our franchise. On this episode of Worlds Collide, we're focusing on our boy, Atreus. This young god, sorry everyone, spoiler, son of Kratos, was without question the most important pillar of God of War that defined nearly every direction we took in narrative, exploration, and combat. For Atreus, we knew we needed to build a systematic AI that would scale and maintain his believability across both the narrative and gameplay. So, while we worked hard on developing his positioning, traversal, and progression, it was Atreus' core combat system that became an even greater monumental challenge. The design, tech, and animations of Atreus' combat, it was meticulously planned for almost every imaginable gameplay situation, including how he interacted with Kratos in battle to boot. So, on this episode, we're bringing together our senior tech combat designer and senior animator to discuss how Atreus' combat went from feeling mediocre to feeling empowering and eventful. Enjoy the show. All right, everybody. Happy Friday. What's up, fellas? How you guys doing? How's everybody doing here?
Good, I guess.
Yeah, doing all right.
Yeah, good.
How's 2020 going? Good kickoff?
Sure, why not?
We should probably introduce you guys first, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we, as we usually do, go around the horn here?
Okay. So my name is Hayato Yoshidome. I'm a, senior staff combat tech designer, and I've been at the studio for almost 10 years.
Wow.
Sorry.
That's impressive. I'm Jack Ebensteiner, senior animator, gameplay animator. I've been here about 3.5 years.
Awesome. I've always been one of this, Hayato. I've seen senior staff on a lot of people's titles, and I was just wondering, what is the senior staff part of it?
Yeah, I mean,
is it just lingo, or
no, it's just one level above senior. I mean, it doesn't really. It's all the same. It's all senior, honestly. But it's just, I guess, yeah. Like from senior to lead, I guess, there isn't really a middle ground. So they just kind of created something that's kind of similar to a lead status, even though you are a senior. So you're not necessarily working on managing people, but it's more about content creation. Okay. Those people are about they're going to be senior staff. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well, there you go. Well, I mean, that's what I
senior
assume.
Staff.
Actually. Yeah, whatever.
We're in the presence of greatness.
Respect the staff. Jack, why don't you give a little bit about your history, kind of where you've come from, kind of leading here to Santa Monica?
Previously, I've jumped around a lot. The first half of my career was predominantly working contract, kind of honestly jumping from crunch to crunch. And so I kind of made it around to quite a few places, and then I ended up at Naughty Dog for about 1.5 years, working on The Last of Us, and that kind of launched me into a number of other things. Just prior to this, I was at Treyarch working on Black Ops 3.
Oh, cool.
So I was doing that for probably about 3 years, and that had been my longest gig. That was my first ever actual staff. Not in the same sense as Hayato here, but my first ever staff position.
Keyword of the podcast episode.
After that, I was kind of just looking for, a little bit of a change of pace, and I've always really loved the variety of stuff that we do here at Santa Monica Studio. Creatures and big bosses and high spectacle and stuff like that. So yeah, that's why I applied here.
And I know you're part of the unofficial GIF squad. You've
yes,
some
absolutely,
some of the most iconic GIFs of all time.
Yeah.
So I thank you profusely. It keeps my Twitter feed going.
I mean, I'm grateful I get to do it.
Yeah.
The Brent Rambo kids thumbs up.
Yeah.
The Ron Swanson throwing the computer away. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you said it on my GDC.
You did. Those are really my proudest accomplishment here, I think.
What's more important than a good GIF?
Can we just talk about that now?
We could
Yeah, maybe.
for 30 minutes. And Hayato, a little bit about your history kind of leading up to today.
Yeah. Oh man, I can't remember that far back. Let's see. Yeah, 2010. Yeah, I actually moved from studio to studio actually, and then I've always wanted to work on an action game. Melee combat game, and then when the Santa Monica studios kind of offered me, an interview, I like immediately grabbed onto it because I like God of War, and yeah, from that point on, I guess it's history. But what's interesting is that my job title at the time was like tech designer, and then the studio really didn't need tech designers or combat tech designer rather. So my position was a little bit of like a mystery. Like it was never like solidified in the company, but I guess I managed for 10 years, so I guess it's fine, I guess. But it was like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm a combat design, tech design, I don't know, in between. So yeah, that's kind of how I started, and yeah, I mean, it's kind of it, I guess.
So that is a perfect segue to the kind of what do you do?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. But I know the both of you sitting here are two of the key folks that helped bring Atreus to life in our last God of War game, and that's really what we're here to talk about today. Kind of the first time we've created like a real, true companion AI for Kratos for this franchise, and so. Hayato, I know this feature was really your baby along the way with many, many people, all facilitating. It was everybody's baby. But for you in particular, you really didn't have much experience developing companion AI, and this was such a fundamental pillar to the game. I mean, how did you fall into this?
That's a very good question. It's a mystery, actually.
Like your staff title?
Okay. Yeah, I know, right?
Just kidding.
It just happened. I was like, what is this staff title? What is this? No, so that's like a backstory, I guess. So when we were on Int 7, Corey did his first pitch of the game. And he was talking about, it's going to be in a Norse mythology. And it was sounding really awesome. But one thing he mentioned about a companion, I was like, oh man, whoever's going to be working on a companion, screwed. We don't have any foundation to make a companion. And I was like, man, whoever's going to work on that is going to have a hard time. And obviously, when we jumped into this project, we're like, oh, hey, you're going to actually work on Atreus. So I was like, oh my gosh, why, what's happening? And it wasn't like I really seeked out to actually create a companion AI. That wasn't really my forte or anything like that. I just wanted to create some of a combat system that's kind of systemic in the combat scenario we have. I was wanting to create something like that, but this whole when they were presented with this thing to me, I was like, well, I guess I can try, and I kind of went with that. Yeah, so it's still a mystery. I don't know who actually made that call. Maybe one of the leads did. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I pissed him off or something like that. You take Atreus now. But yeah, that's kind of how it happened. Yeah.
So what was your first immediate challenge with working to create Atreus? Right.
So at the time, we actually had a couple of combat designers that were kind of researching Atreus. So at the time there was Howard Tang, Mihir Sheth, and then myself. We were just kind of compiling what it takes to make a good companion AI. And, they were doing a really good job. So I was like, all right, maybe I don't have to really work on Trace, but that really came true. But yeah, it was mostly just constantly researching and stuff like that. And just dissecting all these different types of games. It wasn't just purely co-op games. We would look at, AI co-op games. We're looking at actual co-op games you would play together with another friend and stuff like that. So it was just encompassing a lot of things. And yeah, we took a couple of months just doing that, and then we just came up with a list. Yeah.
And I know with Naughty Dog there was Max Dykhoff, who was one of the key creators on Ellie.
Yeah.
It was a big inspiration to you, especially in your GDC talk. Which, by the way, I'm gonna upsell Hayato's GDC talk.
Don't listen to it.
I'm doing it right now. I'm doing it. Go to sms.playstation.com/Hayato's awesome. But talk to us a little bit about what of Max's work and the team at Naughty Dog on Ellie was a big inspiration for you.
Yeah, so Max actually was gracious enough to actually come to our studio, and he actually presented a GDC talk in front of us. And the thing that really stuck was, I shouldn't be laughing, but he said he treated, Ellie like his own child and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, kids. I mean, kids are great and all that stuff, like nurturing and all that fulfillment. That's great, But for me, like, I'm not about that kind of stuff. So when he said that, I was like, oh man, like, how should I even treat Atreus? Like, and what it comes down to is he's going to be a companion. So whenever I'm playing a co-op game, with my wife or whoever, I expect a certain type of like proficiency from my co-op partner. So I was like, oh, you know what? If I if I actually designed Atreus like a co-op partner, maybe that might be worth it or something like that. So like just thinking about like how he treated Ellie, I was like, oh, well, how would I treat a companion AI? I think that like gave me some insight as to like how to approach this problem. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. All the other like technical stuff he mentioned, like how he does like pathfinding and stuff like that. Yeah, we really like dug deep and kind of like got inspiration for how to do that kind of stuff. But mostly like the part where he said he treated Ellie like his child was like that was the number one takeaway for me actually, even though I didn't take it. Yeah.
Yeah, kids. I'm a dad. I have a 4-year-old, and
okay.
They can definitely be a burden.
Yeah.
But they can definitely be very smart and insightful, like Atreus. Once in a while, they're also wisecracks, smart asses.
Yeah, I like my sleep.
But we love them the most.
Yeah, I like my sleep and free time. So I'm gonna put it out there like that.
You're obviously both not dads right now.
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh no. I mean, no.
After the last project, we are now.
Yeah. I guess
he's the birth father. I'm, sort of an adopted parent.
You guys could be brothers. You never know.
Yeah, we could be.
Yeah, it's possible. So if we just kind of jump ahead in time, I remember around when we did the E3 2017 demo, and was the first time we kind of showed off a little bit of Atreus' combat, and there were some pretty vocal fans. On one hand, they were talking about his audio and worried that he was going to be talking a lot and that was going to get in the way. But on the other hand, they were concerned that, he seemed a bit like a burden. And we'll get to kind of how you guys overcame that. But just in that moment as developers, like, how do you guys both feel? Like, how do you guys kind of take that on as a challenge?
Honestly, for better or worse, I don't think I felt that pressure quite the same way that Hayato did.
No, that's not true.
It's totally true.
I don't know.
I mean, I came into the project part of the way through. So when I said that I was an adoptive parent, I meant that I actually just found out today that I was the 5th animator to be assigned to Atreus. There were 4 more before me. Melissa Shim, James Che, Bert Clemente, Dennis Pena. Yeah.
But wait, they all still work here. Let's make
they all still work here. They do.
It wasn't like the 4 came and one was chopped.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Sent back home from the island.
Yeah, no, they were just shifted onto other things. Yeah. That's all. But I mean, they all take some credit here too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for me, in regard to that pressure, like it's always much easier when you're not starting from the blank page. It's much easier to change something and add to something when there are already marks on the page, So in that regard, it was a little bit easier for me, whereas Hayato was starting like fresh from the beginning, ground floor.
Yeah, it was all right. It was a cakewalk. I'm just kidding. It was pretty bad. So even from like the public perception, even before that, even the developers were giving me stuff like that where it's quite understandable. Like in the meetings, people be like, when are we cutting Atreus? I'm like, thank you for invalidating all my work. Thank you. But, it was a valid comment because when you look at Atreus, you're like, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to even ship this kind of thing? And then, I get some pep talks from, the tech lead at the time. He's no longer here right now. He'll be like, well, if ever Atreus gets kind of like, cut, these are a couple of things you can potentially think about. I'm like, okay, I guess that's the level of confidence you're like kind of giving to me. So, but like actually when the E3 like demo was shown and stuff like that, it was actually kind of interesting because I thought like everybody was going to hate on Atreus, given what we've shown and stuff like that. Because it's kind of hard to immediately attach to a character that you don't really know, and it's kind of a bit whiny at the time. But like, yeah, but everybody didn't really give that vibe off. Not everybody. A lot of did, but not everybody. So that kind of gave me hope. And when people were like talking about, actually on YouTube comments, they were like, oh, like, it's like Ellie, like it's a boy version of Ellie, or like all these things that kind of like bugged me. Like, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to focus on my job and just make sure that we'll ship a product that people won't really bash on. That was like my main goal. Like, people won't complain about Atreus. Like,
that was the bar.
Yeah, that was the bar. Because I don't know how to make a companion AI. Like, that's gonna be the best thing I can do. So, but yeah, it was just really just kind of just taking all the criticism, just kind of moving forward. I was like the entirety of the project, I guess.
I guess that was the other thing is I didn't really receive a lot of that criticism, those sorts of questions. You kind of shielded me from that, so.
Well, like the public perception, you mean?
Well, I mean, people coming to you and saying like, "So when are we cutting Atreus?"
Oh,
that whole thing.
yeah. I mean, yeah, that.
I never got any of that, so
yeah,
it was a little bit easier for me.
Out of curiosity, what do you recall the point in the project when people stopped asking when are we going to cut Atreus? When it was like, he's permanent, he's part of the game.
Yeah,
it's not even up for consideration.
I think Corey got super upset. I don't want to say anything about Corey, but I think Corey was like, dude, we're not gonna cut Atreus. Like, stop saying that kind of stuff. So I think there was like a mandate saying like, no, Atreus is going to be in the game. I think at that point it's a matter of, well, is he going to be in combat, or if he's just going to like just follow you around. So that was like the question that was kind of brewing around. And of course, I came to the studio to learn about combat, so of course I want Atreus to like participate in combat. So, I mean, yeah, that's what I kind of pushed through. So, yeah.
And I think it was around that point when you guys started integrating Atreus more into combat, and you came across, you called it the silver lining, when he became more of an autonomous character in combat and was acting as almost like a defense for Kratos, like a distraction.
Yeah.
And he became very useful. So you kind of solved this one problem, but then you created the other of his presence was feeling very less and undermined, and almost like, where is my boy?
Yeah.
So let's kind of dive into that.
Sure. Yeah. So the main thing is like how I approached Atreus was like, how can I make Atreus be useful to like the battlefield in a way. So like if you're like playing like an RTS game or something like that, you'd be like, oh, if this unit went over here and kind of ticked these guys out and whatever, that would be really useful. But when you're playing a third person, action game, like the players aren't typically looking at the battlefield as much. They're focused, like hyper focused on the character they're fighting. And so yeah, even though I thought like when Atreus was doing something in the background, kind of like, pulling aggro and stuff like that, I thought that was good. But in reality, most people didn't even recognize that. They didn't even think that was useful because it didn't coincide with what they're trying to do, like kill this enemy. So that was like the biggest like, oh yeah, like what am I even doing? Like I should really think about what the player wants to do rather than what I think is good for a battlefield. And yeah, that's kind of how it all started. Hey, sorry, did I not answer your question? Sorry.
No, you did. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. And then, yeah, obviously, like all the things that he's doing, it really just came down to like, at the time, like he would play an animation and it might do something, but the players won't really recognize like, oh, is that useful? Like what exactly did he do, right? So like communicating that he's actually doing something useful was the bigger problem. Like under the hood, like when you look at all the numbers and data, he is helping you like kill the enemy in front of you quickly, but you just can't feel it. So that's where Jack kind of saved the day and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as far as how animations play into it, making the silhouettes more dramatic and all of that. I mean, the thing about animators is that we always want to make really big, dynamic, bombastic animations. We're kind of always just waiting for the opportunity. So, I mean, that's really the fun stuff. And kind of at that point in time, with the new direction and tone that we were going for, settling on exactly what the feel of the game would be meant that the pendulum, really swings back and forth quite often, like in terms of the physics and the timing and the posing and all of that stuff. Like 1 week, it's more real world, like people saying for every shot every arrow shot, he needs to actually like draw a new arrow out of the quiver, right? But then the next week, people are like, oh, we actually lost some of the fun there. Okay, what if he can shoot 8 arrows per second? And then people saying like, we need to make the poses more heroic and stretch out the hang time, that sort of thing.
So when you well, let's go back to Jack. Like when you first came onto the project, were you immediately assigned to Atreus?
No, that actually came in probably, I want to say like 4 or 5 months into my being here. I was first assigned just sort of whatever was falling through the cracks at the time, like just a bunch of miscellaneous things. And then my first big assignment was the Dark Elves, which were sort of going through a revamp of their own. Someone had already done a pass on them, and I think they just weren't quite fitting the bill, like when they were set up next to all of the other enemy cast. And so they assigned it to me, and just kind of I was starting fresh on that. So that consumed the first like few months, and then as that was starting to come together, I was a contractor at the time. I was still relatively new here. I'm not sure what possessed Medi, my lead, to
throw you into Atreus.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, "You want to be the sole owner of Atreus?" I'm like, "Oh God, all right."
I remember the first time you actually came on board.
Really?
Well, not on board. I didn't know you. I mean, sorry, it's not like I didn't know you, but when you worked on, I remember first interaction because you worked on. When you worked on Atreus, and we're talking about Atreus, I was like, "Hey, you know the game like Last of Us?" And you're like, "Yeah, I worked on." I'm like, "Oh shit, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." So I was like, "Whoops, I didn't really do any research on your background." So that was like my first interaction. I'm like, "Well, I just look like an idiot in front of you." So I'm like, whatever.
So where did you guys? Okay, so let's go back to like chapter 1 of kind of improving Atreus and his animations and kind of like fixing this issue of presence, right? Like, for kind of the novice and the advanced person listening out there, like let's first talk about what was the fundamental problem? Like when we say Atreus didn't have good presence in the battlefield, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so just kind of like what I just kind of touched upon. Well, I guess the really easiest thing is he wasn't on screen as much, and even if he's on screen, you couldn't really tell what he was doing. So that alone was the biggest problem. But the moment we actually made it so that he had a reason to go in front of the screen, that's when you're like, oh, okay, I think I understand why like Atreus is wanting to go to that specific location and stuff like that. And that's when you're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to feel his presence. He's starting to kind of figure out what my intentions are, and he's trying to read my intentions and kind of follow what my actions are. That's when you start feeling. Sorry, I keep saying presence. His presence, I guess.
No, it's a great word, like staff.
Yeah. God damn it.
His staffing presence.
There are a number of issues, right? Because he's also really tiny, just physically. We have levels. We have arenas where there's tall grass that is as tall as he is. So it's really, really easy to lose him. And until he gets his higher level armor, his like Ferrari red and like gold foil armor. Yeah. He's in like really earthy colors, so it's really easy to lose him.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, I mean, initially he was preoccupied with dealing with the enemies that specifically weren't your focus as the player, And so you're focusing on this guy and he's off dealing with the rest. So naturally, you're not going to know what's going on over there. You're not going to split your attention that way.
So where do you, when in the early days when you're, Jack, working on improving his animations and making them more dramatic, like where does your head begin? Like where do you start to draw the inspiration from? Like how do you go about thinking about that?
Well, I think one of the most important things that we did was for every one of his combat actions, we sort of we came up with a single pose that sort of was emblematic of that action. And so, when he was in that very unique, recognizable pose, you knew what he was going to do. And through the exaggeration of the physics, making him jump higher. I mean, he regularly jumps like 6 or 7 feet in the air, And so with him jumping higher in the air, getting above the enemy's heads, hanging in the air a little bit longer, and striking these more dynamic poses, you're able to recognize that he's setting you up in different ways, so you can sort of plan your attack around what he's doing better. Because previously, a lot of the other animators did like really great previs and prototype work, but I was mentioning like the pendulum swinging back and forth between, like hyperrealism and Looney Tunes, and they were doing a lot of that work back when things were a little bit more realistic, and so. If Atreus was going to jump on an enemy's back, he, would jump like a foot or two in the air like a kid would. And so the player wouldn't actually recognize that he had incapacitated an enemy until several seconds into the fact, So you're losing like quite a bit of time. You're missing that window to actually act on it. And so I think the big turning point, honestly, was the first enemy grab when he jumps up in the air.
Yeah, I think
and
you're
he
right.
like holds the bow with both hands like way above his head and then slams it down and gets into his like combat piggyback mode.
How did that move specifically come about? The actual like design and style of that move, because that's a badass move.
Yeah. Let me think of this. So I think it was Bert or James. I forgot who it was, but the concept of actually like grabbing an enemy was in the game, but it was never like realized as something that we can use like actually in gameplay and stuff like that. But there was something there. Yeah, I actually forgot. Like I just know that we had that type of animation, and we were wondering like, oh, if it's gonna work or not. And I think Jack just kind of took it over maybe, and then you just made it better. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how it happened. I mean, at that time, we were already starting to position Atreus behind the enemies pretty regularly to keep him on screen. And so if we wanted him to grapple an enemy, like that was the only way to do it. The only way for you to see that anything was happening was to like actually get him up above the enemy's head, which involved him, again, like I said, jumping 6 feet in the air and hanging there for like a good second and a half before actually, gripping the enemy.
Yeah.
So we're like deliberately doing a bit more of the Looney Tunes, suspension of
bit,
disbelief.
yeah,
I mean, we
yeah.
have to, right?
Totally, absolutely.
Because when you're playing other games, typically when your co-op partner does something crazy, like the camera cut to them, just have some kind of VO and all this crazy stuff, but we don't have the luxury to just like cut the camera to where the companion is. So like every time Atreus would do something, we had to ensure that the player actually sees everything and stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of great animations, Jack.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
You guys, I think in your GDC talk or somewhere along the line, Hayata, you talked about kind of Kratos and Atreus being almost like the Splash Brothers, which I can't say exactly who the Splash Brothers are, but for all the basketball fans out there, everybody knows who the Splash Brothers are. Yeah. But where did that analogy come from, and how does that apply to the game? For both of you?
So our savior Jason McDonald, he always brings up a lot of sports references when it comes to like team play and stuff.
I didn't know that about him.
Yeah, he loved, like, if you just mention basketball, you're on his good graces essentially.
All right.
So I mean, I don't play sports as much, but I'll watch games here and there and stuff like that. But I do value the type of teamwork that they present, to each other and stuff like that. So just looking at like how they position themselves, and like in basketball, when people are moving into position, some people will just like pass without really seeing where their teammates are, but they know the ball will actually, be passed correctly and stuff like that. And just kind of like the fact that you knew that your teammate was gonna be there is a good sign of like, oh, they're actually like in sync with each other. They know how they're gonna kind of work together. So when we're tackling this like teamwork aspect of Atreus and Kratos, we want to make sure, like, when you're as a player, you kind of know that Atreus will want to double team on the target you're fighting against. So naturally, the position that was best was behind the enemy target. And, just like, when he grabs an enemy, he'll jump in the air and do this kind of stuff. Or if Kratos, like, launches an enemy, he'll actually, like, follow up with arrows. Like, everything is kind of, like, framed so that you'll see it. And then his positioning just makes sense for all these follow-ups to happen. So... yeah, I mean, it's just just look at sports and just kind of emulate the video games, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And like not only like positioning stuff, like we also looked at like volleyball, like the bump spike and whatever bump set spike or whatever. Like that concept also is applying to Atreus because. It's not just when Kratos does something, Atreus does something. Like, Atreus will sometimes do something to the enemy that creates an opportunity for you to do something. So that would be like the set. So Kratos can do the spike. Like, those are different types of... we looked at different types of, like, themes in, like, sports, and then we try to kind of incorporate it into the game. So it's not just basketball.
What's the... Jack, question for you. What's kind of the pipeline between the two of you? So, like, you're sitting at your desk, teams like, we need more aerial moves because, we know if we see Atreus higher up in the air, he has better presence, yada, yada, yada. Like, walk us through kind of like the inception of an aerial animation and then how eventually you and Hayato work together to, I guess, implement it. Or any animation. It doesn't have to be aerial, but...
that need generally comes down from... Hayato. I mean, like, he and I...
Like,
your staff, man. It comes down to
no,
me.
No, I wasn't staff
just
back
a lowly
then.
senior. I mean, I think, first off, the combat design and animation, like, interdepartment relationship, I think is probably one of the closest in the studio. And so we're generally chatting most of the day, every day. And so, part of our conversation would just be like, okay, what have you been thinking about? Like, what's he sort of lacking, and a big part of the design at that point was trying to find the windows, for Atreus to, like, slot himself into, whether that be a reaction to something the player did or, something to set the player up. And so, yeah, you would just tell me, like, oh, I've found this moment that we could probably have him do something. And then we'll just kind of ideate, brainstorm back and forth. Well, actually, we'll probably be talking about, like, I'll be talking about, like, VR at him.
Yeah.
That's generally how, like, most of our days went, is we kind of just shot the shit for, like, half of the day.
Yeah. No,
eventually it always comes back around.
Well, that's fine too.
Yeah, because we would start the day with you coming down with your, like, Rocket League cup filled with like some delicious smelling drink. And we're gonna start talking about, like, VR stuff. Talk about what about
I try to convince you to play D&D.
Yeah, D&D, that
Nice.
kind of stuff, whatever, man. And then we will actually talk. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be saying this, but
It makes it sound really irresponsible, actually.
You got the job done.
yeah,
It's true.
Yeah, but we would spend, like, maybe close to 20 minutes at times just talking about nonsense stuff.
Yeah, but nonsense led to good shit.
Exactly.
It's part of the process.
Yeah, it's part of the process. Yeah, we were just like...
playtime is important.
Yeah. We're blowing off steam. We're just like, all right, we're kind of tired. Let's just talk about this crap. And then hone in, and then we'll just actually talk about Atreus. And that was... it was like that, like, every freaking day, actually. Like, close to every day. Yeah, at the time, yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, at that point, I would head back upstairs because we were actually, even though we worked together every single day, we were, like, separated by quite a distance in the studio. Honestly, like, I wish I had a Fitbit because, like, I would be getting my steps in every single day. But yeah, I would go back upstairs and I would take a crack at it, whatever it was. Spend just like a couple hours blocking something out and send it back his way. And it was actually, it was a pretty rapid process, like he would, get it implemented in like the next like couple hours, and we were able to iterate on things pretty quickly.
So when you say blocking out, Atreus does a flip in the air or a twirl or whatever.
Yep.
You block that out in like a gray box, rough animation. you hand it over to Hayato, you implement it in the combat scenario or in combat in general and know the moment where it could get triggered?
Yeah, that's essentially it. I have the easy job. I just like smash my face on the keyboard and just happens. I'm just like, oh, I did this. All you need to do, and then voila, it's in the game. But yeah, it's a lot easier. Like once everything's kind of set up, I just plug in his animations and kind of see how it works in game and stuff like that. So, I mean, as long as the animations keep coming in, I can just keep churning out the scenarios. Yeah, so that's essentially it.
It was pretty great. We actually got to try some pretty zany stuff that definitely had no place in the game.
Yeah, yeah.
I think one of my favorite ideas that sadly never made it in was because when we're trying to support that one pillar of the game, right, which is the father-son story.
Right.
And so we're thinking of like father-son bonding activities. And so we actually had this working in-game. It was pretty phenomenal. As the player, if you elicited a flyback reaction on the enemy, and Atreus was kind of in that collision course, he would use the bow to quickly hook the guy and throw him back to Kratos. So if you timed it really well, you could basically play catch with your son, tossing this Draugr back.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We almost had a Draugr baseball catch.
Yeah,
Almost. Holy crap.
Another
Almost.
reference to
Holy
baseball.
crap.
Yeah.
Where would we be?
Yeah. That animation is actually, I think it was actually still on Atreus. I forgot to delete it.
Yeah, no, it's on disc. It's in there.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's one of those things where
One Easter egg that we still haven't discovered.
Yeah,
Okay.
People say like, "Oh, reduce the memory." I'm like, "Oh, shut up! I'm gonna keep it in just in case we need it." I'm like, I'm gonna keep it in there. Yeah.
So
our culture here is fantastic. That's actually an interesting segue about the bow. I don't know if it's true or not, but the bow was or was not always intended to be a melee weapon, but when it was introduced as a melee weapon, that opened the door for a lot more possibilities for you guys. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, so there's just so much history behind the bow because, when you think about a kid shooting the bow and arrow, you don't really think of them performing this crazy poses and stuff like that. He'll probably shoot as if like the instructor told him to do it, like an Olympic bow shot. So when Atreus does a bow shot also doesn't take like 20 seconds or it's not long. It's just really quick, like maybe 20 frames or something like that. So when that kind of stuff happens in the battlefield, you really don't recognize that he actually did it. You might see an enemy like get hit by an arrow, but in the heat of the battle, you might not really register that Atreus was the one that shot the arrow that caused a reaction. So none of those things registered. And so one day, even in the narrative, it kind of supports it. Like the hero is saying like, "Oh, save your shots," and all that stuff. So when Atreus, kind of saves his ammo for the most part, but he uses his bow to actually, hit enemies instead. That actually, made it seem more. Intimate is a wrong word, but like when Atreus is actually up in front of the enemy and they're actually attacking each other, that's when you actually see like, oh, something is happening in the battlefield, and you actually recognize that he's meleeing. That was like one of the more important things that happened to Atreus. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, as far as like ideating and like creating the attacks, a lot of it's probably conceptually some of the simpler attacks to make, in large part just due to the like form factor of the bow. We just kind of debated the different ways that you could wield it, and like what the strongest ways to strike would be with it. Plus, channeled a little bit of like baseball or golf in there here and there. We did actually have like a lot of crazy ideas with that as well, that just totally didn't match the game.
Well, let's talk about some of them.
Like one of them that I really liked actually was the ability to unhook the string from one end of the bow and holding the other end, swing the bow around like father, like son. It's like his own version of the blades.
Sure, yeah. No, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Yeah.
That was a hard sell.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I can't. I'll probably get fired if I suggest that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm like, no, I'm going to not suggest that kind of stuff. But I think like when we're actually thinking of like bow swings in general, I think like it's still slightly unnatural-ish, I think. Like when you see movies and stuff like that, you might see like the archer guys kind of doing a melee swipe and stuff like that, but they don't really like say, "Oh, I finally got a bow. I'm gonna start like smashing people with this, bow." It's not really like that. So I think initially it was kind of unnatural to see that kind of movement on Atreus, but because naturally he has a knife, so people kind of gravitate towards using the knife initially, but the knife is a problem because like when he does swing the knife, you can't really see that he actually swung the knife. So initially we tried to put like crazy trails and all this stuff, but he looked like a ninja doing so. Like when he would like run up to a guy and like with his knife and like swipe, he did not look like somebody that we wanted to kind of create. So yeah, I mean in the bow, yeah, it was still a challenge, I think, even though we decided to melee swings with that. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key as far as the animation goes is just to like make sure the overall gesture of the motion looked normal. It looked like, he was swinging any other melee weapon, not to make it look like he had to hold it in an awkward way. So as long as that overall gesture was all right, then I think we were able to sell it fine.
Yeah, you were able to sell it. That was not my job. Well, maybe it was. Whatever. Anyways.
It's all you.
So between kind of improving his presence and the melee combat and kind of these, more vivid, dramatic animations, once all those things started coming together, at what point in the project, from the moment you came on, Jack, as well, did Atreus really start? Did you guys kind of have that aha moment? Like, okay, we're on to something here. Like his combat is fun. People are reacting to it. Like, do you recall any specific moments you're in the boardroom with the team or a meeting or you're just at your computer? Like, where were some of those moments happening?
Maybe you want to talk about it? Okay, I'll go. So, it never really happened. I still think Atreus is terrible. No, I'm just,
well, we're all very cynical of our own work, so it's okay. You are the creator. You can say that.
Actually, yeah, I think it all kind of came in pieces, actually. Like, once you press square with Atreus, this sort of thing happened, and, you pull aggro and whatnot. Once that started to work, I'm like, okay, this is kind of getting better, but his autonomous stuff is kind of crap right now. And then once that started to come in, start to take shape, I was like, oh, okay, now it's getting better. And then the animations got way better, and, all these other things kind of culminated. So it's kind of, there wasn't really like oh, that's the exact moment. Maybe when the playtesters said like, oh, this was kind of like Atreus was kind of cool. Maybe that was like the validation point. I never really. I'm such a pessimist person, so I was like, oh, what, you don't know anything. It's still crap. Don't say that kind of stuff. But honestly, I think like everything kind of improved, and once everything was kind of at a place where it's represented in a game where you can actually like recognize what's happening, I think that's when it happened. I actually don't know the specific point that it happened, though. It kind of just it's kind of a blur, actually, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's okay. For both of us.
Yeah.
We actually both have pretty terrible memories.
Yeah. I'm just
not bad memories of the experience working on it, just bad recalls. What I mean, great memories, nothing but good memories.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, Hayato. You said earlier, Jack saved the day.
Yeah.
Like, in your own words, what does that mean to you?
I think you can take that literally. Yeah, like all the ideas, like as a combat designer, like you have all these ideas and stuff like that, and then you have plans for, what would happen if, X and Y happens and stuff like that. And then as you're working on it, you as a creator will understand what's happening in the battlefield, but most people will not recognize that at all. And to bridge the what I want. To bridge like the understanding what I want to show to the players, like when the animations are great, that's when like players start to understand, oh, like that character wants to do this and stuff like that. So without that, I think, before Jack, there were all these animators that worked on it. They did a great job and stuff like that. But, Jack kind of closed out a lot of the animations. And without that, I think people would not have understood what Atreus was doing in combat as much, I think, if we didn't get Jack, actually. So, yeah, he kind of saved my job. That's why I have the staff title. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for giving me a promotion.
You're very welcome. Well deserved. Yeah, I mean, I think that was probably one of the key elements to the fun is like the primary driver for that was along with the occasional banter line was that the animations were giving the player a solid heads up, that Atreus was doing something, whether that was like he was about to trip a Hellwalker or grab or kick a Draugr or something like that. He was teeing you up. And so even if he was capable of doing that before, it wasn't until you could recognize it and actually utilize it that, it started feeling like he was a competent partner in combat. On top of that, I think the animations themselves kind of add to the fun too, not just the functionality. I think the functionality is probably 90% of it, but I think the flavor of the animation on top, can add an extra little button to it.
I agree.
The more dynamic they are, the more visually pleasing they are to watch. And like when Atreus has some guy in a hold, and Kratos launches them in the air, and he does this piggyback flip, and then kicks them down to the ground. Like that's way more interesting to watch than if he had just jumped off and hit him with the bow again. Even if the effect would be the same,
right?
That flavor, I think, makes it a lot more fun as well.
How do you guys negotiate kind of your wild and crazy, amazing animation ideas versus what Hayato needs in the combat scenario? I mean, do you guys give and take, or are you generally like aligned? I mean, how do you guys negotiate this together?
Yeah, I guess I'm blandish in a way.
Every idea that we arrived at was definitely like improv. It was definitely like a give and take, a yes and sort of situation.
Very organic. But
yeah,
see, like when we would have an idea, and if we didn't laugh or if we didn't like chuckle, it's probably a bad idea. Like the moment we were like, oh my God, what is this? Or like, this is ridiculous. That's more like, okay, I think we have something. Mm-hmm. So whenever the idea or like the animations start to look like an anime where you see it from a crazy anime, then we're like, I think we're on the right track. Yeah. And then there are forces that would kind of push it down to reality. But that's kind of like for me at least, I think that was like the starting point of like how much laughter has happened, mm-hmm. and then that will determine. And I mean the good kind of laughter, not the oh my God, you idiot, that's not gonna work. Not that, but it's like, oh, maybe this might work. That's like the laugh that we're constantly kind of looking forward to. Yeah, or at least I was.
Yeah, absolutely. And my main goal with anything that I do here is to infuse everything with as much anime as I can. I know that it's gonna get squeezed out, so I want to try to like make sure that there's a little bit left over.
A couple more questions for you guys, kind of closing out here. You've made some kind of really cool comments about stuff that was on the cutting room floor, and I love asking everybody that kind of comes into the melting pot of this podcast. If you could go back to the cutting room floor and improve anything or bring something that was left cut, what is that for each of you in your own disciplines?
Well, I think Hayato could probably fill like another several episodes with just this question.
Or something that we didn't have time to do. There's always that.
I mean, my biggest regret, honestly, is the fact that the runic summon birds don't bank when they turn.
Nobody cares.
They don't bank when they turn.
Nobody cares.
They steer left and right like cars do.
Yeah, I mean, I had to script
It's a travesty.
Yeah, because my math skills are terrible. That's why they just turn like that. Yeah.
No, but honestly, I mean, there was a bunch of stuff that I wish we could have gotten in. At one point, he had like a really fun slide on the ground through an enemy's legs, and he'd like pull the knife out and catch him in the Achilles, Kill Bill style. We had this idea actually where he would go into a loop where he holds a knocked arrow up in the air, and you could use the blades to ignite the end of the arrow, or the axe, if you threw the axe to like freeze the arrowhead, and it would give him this like supercharged elemental shot for some crowd control. I like that one a lot. I think another really big one for me, coming back to father-son bonding activities, was paired execution moves.
Oh, so, sure.
Like, currently, if he's in his like tactical piggyback, like holding the enemy in place, if you run up and you hold R2 to do an axe cleave, he'll just jump off the back. He'll just bail. But what I wanted is he actually stays on the enemy, gets a foot in that divot that the axe made, and just like kicks it wide open to finish the guy off. Yeah, it's a little gruesome, but that's the sort of stuff that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
That might have been a little too much.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe a little cold-blooded for that kid.
Yeah,
but.
maybe. But yeah. As far as I want to put in, I want to put everything, like, honestly, like, okay, I might be like kind of being whatever, kumbaya, but like all the work that like animators do, like a lot of it actually doesn't get into the game and stuff like that. So every time like an animation doesn't get into the game, I always feel kind of I feel responsible for the thing not going in and stuff like that. So as much as possible, all the great work they've done, I want to put in the game and stuff like that. But it's true though. So things like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, but maybe one of the more memorable one was like the dragon summon, I guess. Like we did a pass on like Atreus being able to summon a dragon, and he had like the dragon could enter in. He'll do like flybys and stuff like that. So a decent amount of work went into that as well. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's wild.
It is wild, and that was when I was just kind of screwing around. I mean, I shouldn't have been screwing around, but like I was like, it's beta, it's time to screw around, add more features, and that's one of the things that I kind of want to put in. But luckily, Eric Willens at the time, he's like, oh, don't put that in. Like, he told me like, if you put that in, everybody's just gonna use that, so don't do it. I'm like, that's some sage advice right there. So I was like, okay, you're right. I'm gonna cut that. So, but yeah, there's so many things that like we cut and we just couldn't put it in, and there's a graveyard of like assets and like animations I would want to put in, but sadly we couldn't. Yeah.
Actually, on the note of you screwing around during beta.
Oh, like every day? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think you're going to be fired now.
I think one of my favorite moments was during an all-hands meeting. I don't know exactly when this was. It was close to the end, though.
Yeah,
it was way too close to the end.
Yeah.
Things were pretty tight, and we were supposed to be like more or less pencils down on adding new content to the game. So we're like polishing and tuning and bug fixing, that sort of thing. And so anyway, we're getting a production update. We're looking at the schedule, seeing what time we had left. And they throw up this huge image on the projector, an image of a bowl of mac and cheese. And they reiterate, absolutely no noodling. Okay? Like, noodle time is over. That's a fun little visual fun. Noodle time is over. And with that, like, giant bowl of noodles on the screen, I was standing next to Hayato's desk, by the way. I look over, and he's in the middle of actively creating the entire runic summon system. Like, I don't think anybody actually knew it existed at that point.
You knew you were part of it. Don't blame it on me.
Dude.
We were in it together. So you can blame it on me, but we were in it together. There's no way out of this.
It was like total rogue agent stuff.
Yeah, it was rogue. Yeah.
Yeah. At that point, like it was so early on. You weren't even noodling. You were still. How'd you put it? You were still salting the water.
Yeah. I was just boiling the water, putting some salt in the water, and be like, all right, maybe still not boiling yet. So no noodles yet. Yeah. Pre-noodle.
But it's good that we have a culture here that allows us to noodle around until we see the mac and cheese.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That is.
And then the next day, continue to noodle around and pop VR and RTS, and then get our shit done and do amazing stuff.
It was unplanned. It was unsanctioned, but it ended up being one of his best features.
Yeah.
And that right there is why Hayato is a legend.
No, that's not.
No.
He's a legend in these halls.
He saved the day.
No, it's not true. It's not true.
You saved the day.
I didn't, actually. That was just all like frustration built up, and I'm going to do something interesting. I don't know.
Well, we'll call it a draw. We'll say you both saved the day together, because that's why you guys are here talking together about this topic.
Fair.
Sure, I'll take that.
Yeah, maybe.
It's a draw.
I didn't do anything. But okay.
You guys will continue to battle on it for days.
We will, yeah.
We always like to give everybody the opportunity here to say any words to the fans out there. The main reason that we are here today, the number one reason that we create games, is because of our fans. So love to hear if you guys would like to share any words with all the amazing God of War fans out there. Hayato, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so first and foremost, thank you so much for everybody that has played the game. It means a lot to me, mainly because I can also eat and get a paycheck. No, but
It's okay to
seriously,
say that. It is okay.
I mean, it's true. But
It's the truth.
Yeah, it's true. But thank you for all the support and every time I see everybody kind of put their creative work and create like fan art or something like that, I get truly inspired because you guys really love the game and makes me want to work even harder for whatever I'm working on and stuff like that. So thank you so much for supporting the game.
And I'll just second that. I mean, the fan art is absolutely amazing, and thank you everybody for playing. Thank you for giving our boy a chance and not bullying him too much. He's strong, but he's a sensitive little guy. And really, all we can hope for is that our work resonates and creates a connection with people. That's why we do it. So thanks a lot.
Awesome. All right. You guys get back to noodling around.
Yep. I guess
Whatever the hell that means. Or just keep laughing the rest of the day. That's fine too.
That's what we do best. Keep laughing. So
Right on.
All right. Cool.
If you're interested in working here at Santa Monica Studio, we are actively hiring for our next project. You can learn about our studio and more about all of our open roles on our official site at sms.playstation.com. And if you're one of the many fans out there that wants to engage with us, you can follow us on Twitter at Sony Santa Monica or on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram at Santa Monica Studio. If you enjoyed this episode of Worlds Collide, please hit that subscribe button wherever you might be listening to this podcast. From everybody here at Santa Monica Studio, thanks for listening.
Hey folks, this is Sid Schumann from PlayStation Blogcast. We hope you enjoyed this special episode of the show, which gave an inside look at Santa Monica Studio, creators of God of War. We'll see you next week with a normal edition of PlayStation Blogcast.